One of the greatest of the 7 sages of ancient Greece was a man called Solon. Solon was born in Athens in the year 640 or 638 BC. He was from a noble family from the island of Salamis, which allegedly traced its ancestry back to the hero Codrus. According to legends, Codrus was the last king of Athens who sacrificed himself for the good of the city. Although Solon's family was held in high esteem, it did not possess vast amounts of wealth and large fields like the rest of the aristocratic families. At a young age, a restless Solon, seeking both wealth and adventure, became a merchant sailor. For many years he sailed the seas and journeyed all around the eastern Mediterranean, coming in contact with many different cultures. When he settled home, he had made a great wealth for himself, but more importantly, he had gained great knowledge from all his travels. After his return to Athens, he became quite interested in poetry and over time started writing political, patriotic and elegiac poems. Solon would often recite these poems himself at the agora and various other public gatherings in Athens. During that time, the Athenian city-state was in a really bad shape. One of its main problems was the long drawn-out war between Athens and the nearby city-state of Megara. These two fought over ownership of the island of Salamis. During the year 600 BC, Salamis was in the hands of the Megarians, but both city-states were exhausted from the conflict. At that time, the Athenian government passed a law which prohibited the public discussion of the war between these two cities under pain of death. This was done in order to avoid any reignitement of the conflict. Solon, who was exceedingly patriotic to his city-state and who had a special bond with Salamis since it was where his family was from, decided he had to take action, and so he thought of a plan. He pretended he went crazy so as to avoid punishment, wore an olive wreath, burst into the agora, and then started reading one of his patriotic poems, urging the Athenians to take up arms and claim Salamis. With his speech, he fired up the people and ignited a patriotic wave all over Athens. The Athenian government was unable to contain the masses, and so they made Solon the fleet commander and subsequently went to war with Megara. The Athenians succeeded in retaking Salamis, and Solon returned to Athens a champion, gaining great popularity. Until then, he was known for his wisdom, but after the war, the Athenians had also acknowledged his leadership capabilities. Despite the great victory though, the state of Athens was falling apart from the inside. The early 6th century BC had been a time of great political and social upheaval in all of Greece, but Athens probably had it worse than everyone else. In order to understand this topic, let's take a look at the Athenian politics of the time. During the year 600 BC, Athens was an oligarchic state, meaning that only members of aristocratic families were able to hold positions of authority and rule the state. At the top of the government were 9 men. There was the eponymous or chief archon, along with a council of 6 junior or lesser archons, the polemarch, and finally the basileus. Oddly enough, all these men together comprised what the Athenians called the Council of the 9 Archons. The eponymous archon had the most important role as he was the one who administrated the Athenian state. The lesser archons would aid the eponymous archon and would enforce his decision. The polemarch was the commander of the army and the one who oversaw the training of the Athenian hoplites. Finally, the basileus, or king in ancient Greek, was a leftover title from the period of the monarchy. Although the monarchy had been abolished in Athens centuries ago, the title of basileus was preserved due to its symbolism. The new basileus was in charge of religious festivals and sacrifices. Originally, the 9 archons held their positions for life, but in time, this diminished into a 1-year term as more and more aristocrats wanted a share in power. The 9 archons were elected by the Areopagus, which was a council of elders comprised of former archons. The members of the Areopagus would maintain the positions for life. In short, it was a system by the aristocrats and for the aristocrats, since the Areopagus elders would always elect members of their own family as archons. One of the main problems with this type of government was that the noble families would often fight one another for the place of the chief archon, and there were also instances where the chief archon would refuse to step down after his term had ended. These problems were present in many city-states across ancient Greece at that time. In fact, some of these conflicts between the aristocratic families would often escalate into full-blown civil wars. To counteract this, many of the city-states created a new position called the tyrant. During a period of political unrest, they would elect a tyrant to whom absolute power was given. The tyrant was expected to suppress the conflict, stabilize the state, and subsequently relinquish power after a year. However, in many cases, the tyrant would refuse to give up his power or would resort to seizing it forcefully, often with the aid of the common people. In regards to Athens, aristocratic factionalism may have been a big problem, but it was not the most crucial one. In most city-states, since the aristocrats were the only ones who were able to rule, they often ignored the problems of the ordinary citizens. In Athens, they didn't just ignore their problems, they completely neglected them. During the beginning of the 6th century BC, Athens had grown so much that it was barely able to feed itself. The small farmers, who comprised the majority of the Athenian population, were buried in debt. The aristocrats would exploit this situation by buying those farmers' lands extremely cheap and making them work in the fields for a very small pay. In time, more and more people were indebted for life to the aristocrats. The only way for someone to avoid this was to secure a loan in the hopes of someday paying his debt, but a poor farmer could only offer himself and sometimes his own family as collateral. If they failed to pay the loan, they would be sold as slaves either to other Athenian citizens or abroad in other city-states. As a result, half of the farmers had become serfs in their own former lands or had become actual slaves. This situation was tearing Athens apart, and the people were ready to revolt. And this is where Solon comes along. The aristocrats, in order to avoid an uprising of the people, a civil war, or the rise of a tyrant, decided to elect Solon as chief archon and gave him free rein to change the constitution. He was chosen as a mediator specifically because he was neither a revolutionary nor part of the elite, since although he was of noble birth, he did not associate himself with the members of the aristocratic families. Solon began by erasing all debts, thereby relieving the majority of the citizens of their burdens. He made the first example by erasing the debt owed to his father. On top of that, he set free all those who had been enslaved due to debt and forbade from that day onward the enslavement of an Athenian by a fellow Athenian. Solon then decided to change the administrative system. First, he changed the qualifications for the position of the 9 archons from noble birth to wealth. Although the aristocrats were not very happy with this decision, it did not enrage them, since all of them were already very wealthy and therefore still eligible to rule. By doing this, Solon made the administrative council much more inclusive, since there were many wealthy people, mainly traders, who were not of noble birth, and so the monopoly of the aristocracy was broken. In addition, Solon created the Athenian General Assembly, in which every citizen was included. The people at the assembly would vote for any important political and social matter and would also elect the council of the 9 archons. Additionally, Solon restructured the Athenian class system, dividing the people into 4 groups and ranked them according to their wealth. He also created a council of 400 men called the Bouli, in which each of the 4 classes appointed 100 men. The Bouli was in charge of choosing which matters would be brought to a vote in the General Assembly. Thus, the power of the Areopagus diminished significantly, although it did oversee important trials involving accusations like treason and murder. Meanwhile, among all the other problems, Athens was facing a large food shortage. In order to combat this, Solon banned the export of food products except olives and olive oil, since those were plentiful in the region of Attica. Additionally, following the erasure of the debts, the economy was in shambles. As a solution, Solon decided to mint the first Athenian coins and helped in facilitating their circulation. Solon's next move was to reform the laws of the city-state. Prior to that point, Athens had abided by Draco's law code, which was infamous for its severity even by the standards of the time. Solon made the law system much more lenient, although he did keep the death sentence for crimes like murder. Furthermore, he also enacted reforms that enhanced the equality of the law for the common people. From then on, every citizen was equal before the law. Well, at least in theory. Solon's new laws covered a wide array of matters such as theft, adultery, inheritance, and property damage. He had them carved in stone and displayed them outside of the assembly. Unfortunately, only fragments of his laws survive today. While the reforms of Solon were instrumental in stabilizing the state, there were still many challenges to face. On the one hand, the aristocrats were becoming increasingly resentful of Solon after realizing the extent to which their power had diminished. But on the other hand, the common people were demanding further reforms like the redistribution of the land. Furthermore, despite his economic reforms, a large percentage of the Athenians were still struggling to make ends meet. Due to these issues, Solon found himself constantly visited by individuals seeking changes, explanations for his laws, and even the restoration of old legislation. Solon, after many years of ruling, decided to give up his power. But before he did so, he made the Athenians swear an oath that they would uphold his laws for either 10 or 100 years, depending on the source. Solon left Athens and began traveling around the eastern Mediterranean once again. His first stop was in Egypt, where he met the pharaoh Amasis II and the two high priests, Xenophis and Sonchis, who, according to Plato, told him the tale of the lost civilization of Atlantis. Next, he went to Lydia, where he met with Croesus, its great king. During the reign of Croesus, Lydia was at its highest point of power and prosperity, and Croesus himself was an enormously rich man. According to Herodotus, Croesus invited Solon to his palace and showed him his wealth and treasures. After the tour of the palace ended, Croesus asked Solon, "O stranger of Athens, we have heard much of your wisdom and of your travels through many lands, from love of knowledge and a wish to see the world. I am curious, therefore, to inquire of you, whom of all the men that you have seen do you deem the most happy?" And Solon answered, "Tellus the Athenian, sire." Croesus was shocked, as he expected to hear his own name, and demanded to know why did he deem this Tellus of Athens the happiest man. Then Solon answered, "First, because his country was flourishing in his days, and he himself had sons both beautiful and good, and he lived to see children born to each of them, and these children all grew up. And further, because after a life spent in what our people look upon as comfort, his end was surpassingly glorious. In a battle between the Athenians and their neighbors near Eleusis, he came to the assistance of his countrymen, routed the foe, and died upon the field most gallantly. The Athenians gave him a public funeral on the spot where he fell, and paid him the highest honors." Croesus then asked who, after Tellus, seemed to him the most happiest, expecting that at any rate he would be given the second place. But Solon answered again, without flattery, "Cleobis and Beto, sire. The two young men were noted for their filial devotion to their mother and for their athletic prowess and strength. They died in their prime, surrounded by the praise and love of their family and fellow citizens at Delphi, who would honor their memory forever." After hearing this, Croesus replied with anger, "What, stranger of Athens, is my happiness then, so utterly set at naught by you, that you do not even put me on the same level as common men?" Solon then replied, "For yourself, O Croesus, I see that you are wonderfully rich, and you are the lord of many nations. But with respect to your question, I have no answer to give until I hear that you have closed your life happily. For assuredly, he who possesses great store of riches is no nearer happiness than he who has what suffices for his daily needs, unless it so happens that luck attends upon him, and so he continues in the enjoyment of all his good things to the end of his life. For many of the wealthiest men have been unfavored of fortune, and many whose means were moderate have had excellent luck. You should count no man happy until you know the full extent of his life." His answer did not please Croesus at all, and he asked Solon to depart from his palace. But soon after, Croesus was met with misfortune after misfortune. First, his eldest son was killed while hunting, and then Cyrus, the king of kings, the leader of the Achaemenid Empire, along with his army, conquered his kingdom, besieged the capital, and captured Croesus. The Persians built a great pyre, bound the Lydian king to it, and set it on fire. As the flames were rising up, Croesus then remembered the words of the Athenian sage, and he cried out, "Solon, O Solon!" Cyrus listened to this and ordered his men to set Croesus free from the pyre. He then asked him who was this Solon, to which Croesus answered, "One I would give much to see converse with every monarch." And as Croesus explained to Cyrus the whole story, the king of kings was so moved that he allowed Croesus to live and later made him his counselor. Solon, after leaving Lydia, continued his journey into Cilicia, a region in the south of Anatolia. Finally, he settled in Cyprus, where he was given the administration of a city by the local king. While Solon was away, tensions in Athens were rising once again, and political strife was brewing in the city. 4 or 5 years after his departure, Solon's laws fell into disuse, and 3 opposing factions had risen. The faction of the plain, which was comprised mainly of aristocrats, the coastal faction comprised mostly of traders, and the hill faction comprised mostly of shepherds and poor farmers. The leader of the hill faction was Pisistratus, a distant cousin of Solon. Pisistratus took the power by force and became the tyrant of Athens. Despite taking the power with forceful means, his rule was fairly just. He upheld most of the laws of Solon and protected the common people. Now, the sources disagree on what Solon did after Pisistratus claimed power. Some say that he never returned to Athens from his journey. Others say that he came back and tried to abolish the tyranny, but he failed to do so, and so he went into self-exile. And finally, there are those who claim that Solon returned to the city and cooperated with Pisistratus for a time, instructing him on how to rule the state. By that time, however, he was an old man. Most sources agree that Solon died in Cyprus at the age of 80. He was cremated and his ashes were scattered around the island of Salamis. Engraved on his statue in Athens was the following inscription: "The island of Salamis that halted the Median insolence brought forth this holy lawgiver, wise Solon." Solon gained his rightful place among the 7 sages. He was remembered as a leader, a commander, a lawgiver, a poet, but most importantly as a reformer, as it was his reforms that paved the way for the establishment of Athenian democracy decades after his death. The Athenian citizens would revere him and would study his laws and poems during all of antiquity.